Some of the best, most entertaining video games of all time have been set during World War II, but can these games pass uniform inspection? It's my opinion that the wave of historical video games released over the past decade has done wonders at introducing new people to World War II history, but of course no video game can be 100% historically accurate. As a World War II reenactor, collector, and historian who spent more time in itchy wool than some sheep, I'm interested to take a look at how US uniforms have been depicted in some of the most iconic World War II video games. Today, we'll take a look at a variety of US uniform depictions from different games, focus in on some things that they got right or wrong, then rate each game on its historical uniform accuracy. I'm hoping there's at least one video game in the bunch that's accurate enough to receive the coveted perfect rating of 4 out of 4 Lucky Strikes. During the war, US K rations sometimes included a small pack of 4 Lucky Strike smokes, so I figured that'd make for an appropriate rating scale today. Let's get right into it by looking at the first game. Call of Duty World at War. This game came out in 2008. It's one of the older ones we'll look at today. I remember playing it on my Wii. I had that little Wii zapper thing that you could point at the screen. This one holds a special place in my heart. So this first uniform being depicted here is a late war US Marine Corps uniform. I see this guy has a Browning automatic rifle, but the gear he's wearing is not typical of an automatic rifleman. I can kind of give him a pass for that though. In video games you're switching weapons a lot and your gear doesn't always match up with the weapon that you're using. Looking at the uniform itself, it looks like this guy is wearing the P-44 US Marine Corps uniform. That was a later war uniform. You really only see that worn right at the end of World War II. And I can tell that's the uniform because it looks like this guy has a flap over his pocket and his pants have cargo pockets with snap or button closures there, which are typical of the P-44 uniform. With that said, the pockets on his pants are kind of oddly placed. They should be hip pockets, and instead it looks like they're down by his knees for some reason. The leggings that he's wearing around his boots are modeled interestingly. It looks like they have way more hooks than the World War II Marine Corps leggings should. These look more like the Army leggings used in World War II. Overall, there are some minor details that I don't like, but everything on this uniform looks pretty good. He has a couple frag grenades on him, and I actually have a few reproduction frag grenades right here. It looks like the grenades he has are this green color, but they're wearing down to show this yellow color underneath. That's a cool detail because early in the war, the grenades were this yellow color, but obviously this is a bit too visible to the enemies. So that's a cool detail, including those early war grenades that had been repainted to be olive drab. He also has a bandolier slung over his shoulder, so those could either hold the N-block clips for the M1 Garand, or they could hold stripper clips, which could be used to load the 1903 Springfield rifle, but also could be used to reload BAR magazines. So it's not uncommon to see BAR men carrying bandoliers with extra ammunition, but that would be in addition to a belt full of loaded BAR magazines. The stripper clips were just to reload them later once they were all empty. He also has a K-bar knife, much like the one that I have here. That's historically accurate for him to have that, but his is just kind of tucked into his bandolier. I think that would fall out. You don't really see guys carrying it that way because it would easily get lost. I won't have props like this to show for every game. I just happened to set a couple of these items out and then see them in this first clip. So overall, a few minor inaccuracies, but nothing glaring. Let's look at this next loadout from the same game. This Marine is outfitted with a trench gun, and he has a World War I style ammo vest on his chest and 2 shotgun ammunition pouches on his belt. There are photos documenting the use of those grenade vests by Marines who were outfitted with trench guns. Even though a shotgun ammo pouch did exist, they weren't very commonly used. I don't know if they just weren't available or if they didn't work well. But these 2 shotgun ammo pouches that you see this Marine with on his belt, you typically would not see those being used in the field. Typically, Marines found different ways to carry the ammo for their trench guns. Sometimes they would load it inside of rifle cartridge belts so they could have it available, and at other times, like I said, they made use of these grenade vests. It's interesting to note that even though we call those grenade vests World War I grenade vests a lot of the time because that's when the design was created and they did issue them out in World War I, the Marine Corps actually started making those vests again during World War II and issuing them to troops. I'm not quite sure why, because there was a huge supply of them left over after World War I, but maybe they just wanted to show the Army they could make their own vests and they didn't need to rely on their supplies. I don't know. That last guy we saw didn't have any helmet cover, which kind of surprised me, but this guy we can see has the Marine frog skin helmet cover, which would be accurate for Marines at this time in the war. And he also has an HBT uniform cap on underneath his helmet, which was also very common for Marines to do. I will say it looks like he's missing some of the basics here. It's cool that they included that grenade vest, but for example, he only has one canteen and Marines typically had at least two because of the hot weather they were fighting in. It was common for Marines to have a jungle first aid kit and a regular first aid kit on their belt, or at least the regular first aid kit. This guy doesn't have any of those. Also, the canteen he does have here is stamped USMC on the cover. They did not mark the covers that way, so I'm not sure why they included that. Overall, I would say that's a pretty good uniform depiction, but they were missing out on some of the basics, so I'll have to give that one 2.5 out of 4 lucky strikes. Now, before I start nerding out about this next uniform that US soldiers wore while fighting off attackers in World War II, you might not even know that modern attackers are targeting you online as we speak. For example, if I Google my editor Hudson's name, just look at how much of his super sensitive information I can find in seconds. Hudson, no need to blur any of that info, just leave it in, it helps my point. It's the same story if I look myself up, and it's frankly terrifying that people out there are actively trying to sell my personal information online. Anyone out there could find that info with a simple Google search. At least that was true before I found out about today's sponsor, Aura. If you've ever wondered how scammers get your phone number or why your inbox is flooded with spam, this is why. There are companies called data brokers that sell your personal data. They do it without your consent and they make billions selling it to scammers, marketers, and even stalkers. The companies are legally required to remove your information if you ask, but of course they make that process really hard and difficult on purpose. That's why I recommend today's sponsor Aura to my family and friends. They take care of the hard part, automatically removing your data from these sites and keeping it off. I knew for a long time that I wasn't doing enough to protect myself online, but I put off doing anything about it because I didn't want to deal with the hassle of signing up for all these different services to get the protection that I need. Aura is the only security tool I've found that doesn't feel like a chore. It's fast, simple, and gives me all-in-one digital security. You may already have some security tool, but if you don't have Aura, that's like adding armor to your tank and leaving the hatches open. With Aura, you can get everything in one place, like alerts if your personal info is found on the dark web, real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking, 24/7 monitoring to help keep your identity secure, a secure VPN, antivirus, password manager, and more, and US-based support available around the clock if something goes wrong. Plus, if anything does happen, Aura includes $5 million of identity theft insurance protection. It's one app with every level of protection. It's so creepy to me how easy it was for strangers to find my phone number and even past addresses. I don't want that info falling into the wrong hands, and that's why I chose Aura. My sensitive information shouldn't be a product for some data broker to sell off. Click the link in the description or scan the code on screen to go to aura.com/www and try Aura free for 14 days. In those 2 weeks, you'll learn where your data is being exposed and sold. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable, and you shouldn't either. Let's take a look at this next game. Battlefield 5. This is a newer game. I think this came out in 2018, and this is one that I haven't actually played much myself. Some of these games do have customizable characters, so that makes it a bit tricky, but I tried to get some representative examples. So here we see a US paratrooper getting ready to go into Normandy. It looks like he doesn't have paratrooper pants on. I don't know if that's a customization issue or if they just don't have those in the game. He has that iconic M42 paratrooper jacket on, and he even has additional pockets added onto his sleeves. That was a modification that was common among some troops in the 101st Airborne. There are a couple inconsistencies in his uniform. Again, it's tricky because of customization, but a paratrooper typically would not be wearing leggings. He would have paratrooper boots on. If he were in the 101st Airborne though, you would expect to see parachute infantry regiment markings on the sides of his helmet. His web gear is okay, but it looks like it's kind of lacking here. It looks like he has a pouch there for 1911 pistol magazines, but I don't see a 1911 on him. It also looks like he doesn't have a first aid kit on his belt, which is like the most common piece of gear that every soldier would have on their belt. Again, some of those inconsistencies are probably due to customization, but things like missing the first aid pouch, I mean, come on. Let's move on to this next character. Now, this is a paratrooper in the Battle of the Bulge. This one actually looks a bit better. He does have jump boots on. Are those his pant leg cuffs? His pant legs are kind of cuffed in an interesting manner, but that's not a problem. Again, he's missing some of the basics. He has a cartridge belt on, but he doesn't have a canteen, he doesn't have a first aid pouch, he doesn't have any of the essentials. He's also wearing combat suspenders, which were more popular among the airborne troops. It does look like they did a very good job of modeling the US wool overcoat that a lot of troops used in the Battle of the Bulge. That looks really good to me. It also looks like he has some scarves and maybe a balaclava wrapped around his face. That's very typical of what you see troops doing during the Battle of the Bulge. Also, when we look up close, we can see that he has the little A-frame yokes on the inside of his helmet liner, letting us know that that's a paratrooper helmet liner. That's where his paratrooper chin cup would be attached. That was a special feature only on paratrooper helmets to help keep their helmets on their heads when they jumped out of planes. There were some good details included in those uniforms, and I will say the gear that they modeled in there was modeled very well, but I still feel like they missed out on some of the basics. But even with that in mind, Battlefield 5 gets 2 out of 4 lucky strikes for its historical uniform accuracy. 2 out of 4 isn't that bad, but let's see if this next game can do better. Day of Infamy. This one came out in 2017. I don't think I've ever played this one before, so let's take a look. So this says Bastogne Offensive, but there's not much about his uniform that makes me think of Bastogne. It looks like he's wearing a mixture of an M41 and M42 uniform. I'm wearing the M41 jacket right here, and you can see it does not have big cargo pockets at the bottom of it like his jacket does. Those cargo pockets are more typical of the M42 paratrooper uniform, so I'm not quite sure why they included that. He also has a grenade on his chest that is missing the spoon, so that would be quite alarming. He probably has another 2 seconds before that thing blows him up. He has that 1911 on his hip and an M3 fighting knife. With this gear loadout, it would make much more sense for him to have an M1 Garand bayonet, since he's wearing an M1 Garand cartridge belt and holding an M1 Garand. But it's not necessarily completely wrong, I just don't think it makes a ton of sense. I can see he has some gloves on, but typically in Bastogne, you see guys with not only gloves, but big wool overcoats or Mackinac coats, and scarves and balaclavas and all this stuff on them to try to keep them from getting frostbite. And I'm just not getting that vibe from this. At least this guy has a first aid pouch, thank you. He doesn't have a canteen though, so again, missing the most basic stuff. Let's look at a model from the same game depicting a soldier on D-Day. This looks to be the same loadout, but he has a 29th insignia painted on the front of his helmet, and he has that waterproof gas mask bag strapped to his chest. I will say, that is a really good model of the waterproof gas mask bag. It looks very nice. He's at least wearing it properly here with the straps crisscrossed in the back. But I don't think it's enough to make up for that other stuff we saw. To be honest, none of these are really wowing me so far. At least Call of Duty World at War had some really cool details in their character models. The rest of these, they're just missing the basics and whiffing on a bunch of simple stuff. For its uniform accuracy, I'll give Day of Infamy 2 out of 4 lucky strikes. I have higher hopes for this next one. Let's see how they do. Enlisted. Enlisted came out in 2021. This is another one that I don't think I've ever played, but I've heard a lot of good things about it, so let's see their uniform models. So first off here, we have a soldier in the Battle of the Bulge, and this looks like a guy in the Battle of the Bulge. He's got that iconic white helmet cover on, he's got scarves around his neck. It looks like he has maybe a balaclava, or maybe that's just a scarf wrapped around his head. It's common to see guys wrapping scarves around them underneath their helmets to keep their head warm. He's got great looking paratrooper boots on. He's got that nice overcoat, although it looks like it's missing some buttons, but I could look past that. The most glaring thing to me here is whatever that big pouch is on his belt. I don't even know what that is, honestly. It kind of looks like one of the 3-cell grenade pouches that's missing one of the pouches, so it only has 2. Even if it did have the right number of pouches though, those grenade pouches were only used at the very end of the war. You wouldn't see them in the Battle of the Bulge. Does he have the basics? A canteen and a first aid pouch. Let's spin him around. One thing that's weird is he has an M43 shovel on his belt, and then on his pack there he has a carrier for an M1910 shovel. So I don't know why he would need 2 shovel covers. So he doesn't have the first aid pouch. That's been a common complaint with a lot of these, but he does look really good, a lot better than the other ones we've looked at so far. Now let's look at their depiction of a soldier on D-Day. So right off the bat, I can see they used the wrong color pants for this guy here. So the pants that he's wearing are the US wool trousers. Those should be like an olive drab. Some people call it a mustard color, but definitely they were not this khaki color that we see here. It looks like they included the appropriate footwear here. This guy has the service shoes with leggings over them, but his leggings are put on backwards. The hooks on the leggings are supposed to face towards the back so that while you're walking, they don't get snagged on things. He has that same waterproof gas mask bag that we saw earlier, but he's not wearing his properly. Usually you see guys crossing the straps in the back because if you try to wear it the way this guy has it on, it'll just slip off your shoulders and fall off. Again, no first aid pouch. How many times am I gonna have to say it? You need a first aid pouch. The other thing that strikes me here is that for a soldier on D-Day, he has a shockingly little amount of gear on. Where's this guy even gonna carry his ammunition? He just has a pistol belt on with no pouches. He should have at least some ammo and then probably a general purpose bag, a haversack, some other gear. Soldiers landing on D-Day were typically carrying so much gear they could hardly move. When you look at footage from D-Day, it looks like troops are just walking up the beach because they're so weighed down with all their gear. This guy seems to have the lightest possible loadout. And if your argument is that maybe he ditched his gear, that's completely possible, but typically the first thing that troops would ditch was that gas mask bag. Within the first few days of the invasion, a lot of troops ditched those bags because it was just extra weight and they were confident that the enemy wasn't going to use gas. They figured if they were going to, they would have done it already. This guy also has a 1903 rifle with an M1905 bayonet. That's the longer 16-inch bayonet, and those were phased out during World War II. By this point in the war, both of those items, the bayonet and the rifle, had been replaced in common use, but it actually still wasn't uncommon to see either of those on the battlefield, so they get a pass for that. The M41 jacket that this guy is wearing also looks very good, much better than the last one we saw, that's for sure. I had higher hopes for Enlisted, to be honest. They did have a couple good models in there and a few good details, but overall, I'd give them 2.5 out of 4 lucky strikes. This next game I have played plenty of times. Call of Duty World War II. This one came out in 2017, and like I said, I've played this a bit. I think the uniforms in this are typically pretty good. I know there's often a high level of customization, so that can lead to some weird stuff, but if I remember correctly, they did a pretty good job with the basics. So let's see if that holds true in the examples we have here today. Alright, so right off the bat here, we can see the customization coming through with that crazy weapon that he's holding. That is actually 100% period correct. That's what every soldier used in battle. A bright red Sturmgewehr. I'm kidding, but his uniform actually looks pretty good here. He has an M43 jacket on with his cartridge belt, and it looks like he has a Mark II frag grenade and a TL-122 flashlight clipped to his suspenders. It looks like he has a little something tucked in his belt. I wish I could see what that is. Now, I'll notice that from the front, it looks like he's wearing combat suspenders. They have those D-rings on, and then when you spin them around, it's actually a haversack. So I think they accidentally used the straps that would be typical of combat suspenders and kind of married them with the haversack. Let's look at some of the basics. So he has the haversack with a shovel and a meat can pouch. He has a bayonet, he has a canteen, he has his cartridge belt, but does he have the first aid kit? Okay, he does. I missed it at first, but it's on his side there. I think this is the first one we've seen that hits just the very basics. They're not doing anything crazy here, but this is a good representation of what a US soldier might wear later in the war. We can see he has the division symbol from the game painted on his helmet, but that's based on certain troops during the war that would paint their divisional insignia on their helmet. If we look at his feet, this guy's wearing the US double buckle boots, the M1943 combat boots. Those would be very common for a soldier at this time, so I think that's a great uniform setup. I think that's the best uniform depiction we've seen so far. This next uniform here, this looks to be some kind of fantasy mountain or winter camouflage pattern. I don't think this ever existed during World War II. It looks like all of his gear is the same there, so that's pretty accurate, but that camo pattern that you can apply to him is total fantasy. And that's pretty in line with what I said about this game. They give you a lot of options of things that didn't really exist back then, and I think that's fine. It makes the game more fun. Call of Duty World War II gets 3.5 out of 4 lucky strikes. That's definitely the best depiction we've seen so far, even if they have some customization options that aren't completely accurate. This next game is the oldest one we have on the list today. Medal of Honor Allied Assault. This one came out way back in 2002, but I used to love playing these old Medal of Honor games as a kid, so I had to include one of them on the list. For this one, we'll just take a look at this D-Day sequence to see some of the uniform items that the troops are wearing. We can see the 2nd Rangers being depicted here. They have the Ranger diamond on the back of their helmet, plus the Ranger patches on their sleeves, so that's a good detail. I'll say, even though the graphics are a little more primitive, the uniforms are pretty good here. All these guys have their cartridge belts, they have canteens, they have haversacks, they have first aid pouches and bayonets. They've got all the basics. They also have those waterproof gas mask bags on their chest, which were typical for infantry troops on D-Day. And it looks like our BAR gunner here is even set up with a BAR ammo belt. Most of these troops are wearing the standard M41 jacket, which would be typical for the Rangers. It looks like some of them also have HBT or herringbone twill uniforms. Those weren't quite as common among the Rangers, but they did make use of a few of those. You can definitely feel the Saving Private Ryan influence while watching this. There are even some guys here wearing the D-Day assault vests. That's an item we haven't seen yet. Those were issued out to certain infantry troops. I think the Rangers did use them, but not as frequently as certain other divisions. I also noticed that our sergeant here has a horizontal stripe on the back of his helmet, and he also has a sidearm on his waist. The stripe on his helmet is called a follow me stripe, so before the invasion, officers painted vertical stripes and NCOs painted horizontal stripes on the back of their helmet, so that way it would be easy to know who was in charge during battle and who you should follow. It wasn't super common for non-commissioned officers to have sidearms, but they were more commonly seen with them than just the standard infantry troops, so that's kind of a neat detail. I'm trying to find something to complain about, and so far I haven't found it. As far as the uniforms and equipment go, I'll have to give Medal of Honor Allied Assault 4 out of 4 lucky strikes. I honestly didn't expect that from a game this old, but I guess back then, they weren't trying to get fancy with anything, they just did the basics. This makes me want to go back and play some of these old games. These were the best. That's a pretty high bar to beat, but let's see if any of these newer games can pass up Medal of Honor Allied Assault. Hell Let Loose. Hell Let Loose came out in 2019, and this game is known for being very historically accurate. I've watched some friends play this one, but I don't think I've ever played it myself, so let's take a look. So far, I like what I see. He's got a basic helmet net there. The holes are a little bigger than what I would expect to see on that style of net, but that's fine. That's such a tiny thing. A great model of the M41 jacket here. I still can't believe that Day of Infamy messed it up so bad. The model of the haversack looks really good as well. Let's see if this guy has the basics that we've been looking for. I can see not only does he have a first aid pouch, he has the World War I style first aid pouch, which is an interesting detail. Those were still in use during World War II, but they weren't as common. So it's kind of neat that they included that. He's got the canteen, the bayonet, the haversack, the cartridge belt, the helmet net, the leggings. Everything looks good. There's got to be something I can complain about here. He's even wearing his haversack properly, with some of the straps clipped to his belt and the others going underneath his arms. Most game developers miss that. I've got nothing more to say about that one. That's a pretty great depiction. So this is another Battle of the Bulge uniform, and again, I like this one because it looks like something you would wear when you're actually cold. That's like the main thing the Battle of the Bulge is known for. He's got that overcoat we've seen a couple times. Again, he has that white helmet cover that was typical of infantry troops during the Bulge. He has a first aid pouch, he has a canteen, he's got all the basics. He even has a balaclava on. Those weren't super common, but there was both an issued version of the balaclava and a Red Cross pattern that Red Cross chapters would have their members knit and then mail overseas to the troops. So you do see some soldiers wearing this style of balaclava during the Battle of the Bulge. I think they also sometimes stole them off the Germans. Nothing more to say here. I kind of wish there was more here for me to nitpick, but everything they did looks really great. Hell Let Loose gets 4 out of 4 lucky strikes. Can this last title live up to Hell Let Loose? Let's find out. Squad 44, aka Postscriptum. This game was first released in 2018, so around the same time frame as Hell Let Loose and a couple of those other games we looked at. I just have some still screenshots to look at for this one, so let's start off by looking at the Marine Corps uniform. So the first model we have here is a Marine with a trench gun. Let's just go from bottom to top and look at some of the details. His boots have that pointed shape that's typical of Marine Corps boondockers, and it looks like he has the proper Marine Corps leggings on. He's wearing the Marine Corps P-41 uniform. Earlier we saw the P-44 uniform that came around very late in the war, but the P-41 uniform we see here is what most Marines wore throughout World War II. Again, he's got a K-bar knife on his belt. I will say it looks like his K-bar is dangling from a wire hanger. So a lot of US web gear was hung from the belt using these wire hangers, which go into these loops on the pistol belt. But these leather K-bar sheaths, like we see this character wearing, they typically didn't have a wire hanger. You would just weave your web belt through this and wear it that way. Maybe there's some way you could like stick a wire hanger through here to make it hang from your belt, but I don't know what the benefit of that would be. That's a very small detail, but at least I found something to nitpick here. Again, we see this guy here with 2 shotgun pouches. Like I said, those shotgun ammo pouches weren't used very commonly by Marines during the war. It would actually make more sense for him to have an M1 Garand cartridge belt or something like that to store his shotgun ammo in. Now, the canteen this guy has on is a US Army canteen, not a Marine Corps one. I wouldn't say that's inaccurate. You do see Marines during the war using a lot of US Army gear, including canteen covers. But equipment nerds like me will notice that they represented the reinforced Army canteen cover. Those were just a variation of the canteen. A lot of them got issued to the airborne, but they were used by other troops as well. And it's neat that they chose to represent that. I don't know how many of those went to the Marines, but it's cool to see one modeled here. This guy even has his uniform stenciled, which is a very neat detail. He has P-41 suspenders on, which look pretty good to me. And of course, he has that iconic Marine Corps helmet cover. Let's look at a couple gameplay screenshots to see some more uniform variations. The guy right in front of the player here has 2 canteens on. It looks like one maybe has a metal cap and one has a plastic cap. One is stenciled and one isn't. It's cool to have some variation like that on the characters. And the guy on the far left has the Marine Corps P-41 upper pack, also called the 782 pack on. Whoever worked on this game, they're some serious nerds, because they did it right. Here's the P-41 or 782 upper pack. They even have the horseshoe roll around the pack. That's either a camouflage poncho, like the one I have on this table, or a camouflage shelter half being used to create that roll around the pack. I also love that the flamethrower here has a Kilroy drawn on it. That's just awesome. Well, those Marine Corps uniforms are killer. Let's move on to looking at some Army Airborne uniforms. I grabbed a couple different gameplay screenshots here to show some uniform variation. I think some of these are from older versions of the game, but I wanted to get a little bit of variety here. He has those goggles on his helmet. Those are called Polaroid 1021 goggles, so those are very accurate. That's a great detail. And he also has a radio on his back. That's an SCR 300 set, also sometimes called a BC 1000 by collectors today. We can't see much of his uniform here, so let's move on to this next screenshot. Here's a 101st Airborne paratrooper who met his unfortunate demise. You can see he has that bandolier across the chest. That's of course accurate. He also has a knife on his leg. That's an M3 fighting knife that he has strapped around his calf. That was very common for paratroopers to do during the war. Great depiction of the M43 uniform here. This is clearly depicting Operation Market Garden based on the uniform this paratrooper is wearing. I will say for that operation, it was common for the 101st Airborne to use the small hole helmet nets. These larger hole nets were much more common for Normandy, not so much for Operation Market Garden. Other than that though, it's a great uniform. Here's another still picture of a paratrooper. Love the uniform here, love his double buckle boots, and he even has a Hawkins mine tied to his leg. Those are all great details. I love that he has the spade painted on the side of his helmet. That was the regimental symbol for the 506th. The most glaring thing I see in this photo is the carry handle on the BAR. I know we're not talking about weapons here, but during World War II, BARs did not have carry handles on them like we see here. That was something added very late in the war, and most believe that none of those saw combat because they came around so late. You definitely wouldn't see one in Holland like this. And here's another picture with some great details. This guy's in the 82nd Airborne, and we can see, again, he's got those 1021 goggles on. He has his double buckle boots. He's got a Hawkins mine there. He even has the shoulder holster, which became popular with airborne troops around this time. There are definitely some great uniform depictions here. I had to look really hard to try to nitpick some minor inaccuracies in there, and there really wasn't much to speak of. Squad 44, like the 2 games that came before it, gets 4 out of 4 lucky strikes. I tried to kind of put these in a random order. I did not expect the last 3 to all get a perfect score, but that's just the way it worked out. Overall, I was really impressed at the uniform depictions we looked at today. Very few of these characters had blaring inaccuracies that were sticking out. I had to look pretty hard to find anything to comment on. Even in those games that I did point out some little inaccuracies about, don't think that that some way makes them a bad game because their uniforms aren't perfect. I think every game on this list has done a great job at getting people interested in history, and that is way more important than whether or not the characters are wearing the perfectly correct pair of pants. Do you guys want to see more of this? I focused in on some specific examples of US uniforms in this video, but there are way more video game depictions of uniforms out there I could take a look at, so let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Remember to carry your first aid pouch, and I'll see you in the next one.